Go for it.
But he explicitly mentions it toward, they explicitly mention it toward the end of this reading, but it's this notion of the universality of Oedipus, because it seems like that's a big chunk of what, or a big part of what he's working on in both chapters. You know, he's trying to show, look, Oedipus doesn't explain these ethnology. Anyway, it doesn't explain the anthropological evidence, and that his thing does a better job. And then in the last section, then the last part that we read, he brings it up explicitly. And you know, one thing I've got both from you guys and from just what they say is you can't really paint psychoanalysts or even Lacanians as, you know, as a unified thing, that there are all sorts of different blocks and different opinions about all sorts of stuff, different interpretations of Lacan, different ways of extending Lacan. But at least it looks like part of what they're dealing with is this are people who believe that there's sort of this universal characteristic of Oedipus. And I mean, as best I can tell, if there is a kind of a primary effort in these pages, it's to debunk that idea, you know, and to say, look, you don't see these Oedipal structures in primitive societies. And then, you know, it seems like in the first chapter that we looked at, he's specifically talking about, and maybe I'm wrong, but anyway, he's specifically talking about like literally family relationships. But then he then begins to talk about the social relationships, which I guess from what you guys have telling me is, you know, closer to Lacan in the sense that he's not talking about literal family relationships, but these sort of social structures that are built on these principles. But anyway, there's not really a question there. That's just kind of my sense of what he's doing. And I don't know enough about Lacan to know how fair. I mean, they do cite some specific people, like these Lacanian ethnologists. So I guess I should trust their reading of those guys, but you know, that some of them really do believe that there's sort of this universal Oedipal thing going on. But then I really don't I kind of understand what Deleuze and Guattari are offering in contrast, and kind of understand their argument both against Oedipus and for their view, but not enough to be, you know, absolutely sure about anything. But there's not a question there, but that just seemed to be the general, you know, arc of what was happening here. And so I'll just throw that out as maybe that's too high a level. Maybe we want to look at more particular passages, but that seemed to be the kind of general thesis of this section to me anyway. Maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah, that's a good general point to kind of come out of. I think like some associations that were standing out to me that showed up in this particular reading were like the difference between the intensive versus the extensive. And it felt like they were talking a lot about this like shift into extension, and some associations I was making with intensive and extension were like intensity had this like ambiguousness to it, whereas like the extensive was about, you know, finding some sort of determination, like a yes or a no. That part seemed kind of interesting to me. I don't really know how to talk about it. I don't really know like what are they actually referring to, but I feel like they use that language a lot to refer to like shifts, like the repression of the intensive and stuff like that. That's maybe something that stuck out to me.
I have an analogy that I'm curious whether Chase thinks this is a good analogy. So, you know, I'm thinking more of difference and repetition, but they have this sense that they describe this kind of a field of pure difference. And so then I think of it in terms of electromagnetic fields because of my background, but you could say like a gravitational field or something, but that there is this field, and within a field, you know, whether it's just literally think of a magnetic field that a magnet generates. There aren't any discrete things in a field. A field is a continuously varying intensity field. And there's differences of intensity in the field, but there aren't any things, you know, that have extensive properties, like literally extension in the sense of physically, like an extended thing. So in a field, whether it's a gravitational field or an electric field or a magnetic field, you have a continuous but it's varying, you know, all sorts of variations in intensity. And there's differences of intensity, you know, if you like pick 2 points, there's a difference of an intensity, you know, like in an electric field or a magnetic field, you know, if you have the right kind of instruments, you can actually measure that. But it's a continuously variable thing, but because it's continuously variable, it's really hard to talk about what's happening at any particular point. But then if you like, you know, take an example, you've probably all seen this. And again, I don't know if this is a good illustration, but you know how you've seen a magnet, like you put a magnet under a piece of paper and you throw a bunch of iron filings on it and it generates you know, you can see kind of the field lines of the electromagnetic field, but they're iron filings that are distributed through there. The field is an intensive continuous field, but those iron filings are actually particular objects. You know, they're literally little pieces of metal, right? And so you can go and, you know, you could separate and define the relationship between the iron filings, like, you know, like literally how far apart they are and how long they are. So they have all these extensive properties, but you're never going to get a full adequate description of the field, the continuous variation in intensity, by looking at the extensive properties of the iron filings. You know, so the iron filings gives you some idea of what's happening there, but once you enter into that domain of extension, you lose information about the intensities that are involved, and you get just a bunch of scattered, extensive objects. So I don't know, is that anything like what the difference between intensity and extensity, Chase?
Yeah, definitely. And okay, so in difference repetition, he talks about intensity and intensive quantities and extensive quantities. And some of what he did with difference repetition is kind of sort of translated into ethnology and whatnot, in a very it's very interesting how this was done, that intensity and extension is applied in this case to ethnology and to kinship kind of relations, affiliation and alliance. And I think that's definitely what is going on. And also the field idea, so he says that in difference repetition, that there is a kind of field of individuation of these pre-individual elements. And the idea is that you have something that is prior to a distinct form of an individual, and that these processes that are differential processes, so they're relating different things together. And these things are what inevitably will bring about an actual individual. But those fields of individuation are also fields of intensity. So individuation is synonymous with intensity in difference repetition. So I think that's definitely one way to think of it, but also the way that you have so one level, it's kind of strange. You have, okay, the idea of an individual, you think of that as this kind of atomistic, extensive kind of thing. But by saying that the individual is connected with intensities, he's already making it where the individual isn't something that's self-enclosed within itself. Instead, it's going to involve all these relations, these implicated relations within a kind of field phenomena. And I think, so it's difficult to describe. And so you can kind of look at, in physics, intensity, and you can get somewhat of an idea of it in the sense of, okay, just as an example, temperature, that's an intensive quantity. So if you have a pot of boiling water at 100 degrees, that isn't just simply composed of two degrees that are 50 degrees and just kind of thrown together. So there's a sense that temperature as an intensive quantity, it's not simply composed of a unit of temperature that is homogeneous. Instead, each degree is its own thing. It's a singularity, but it envelops all these other degrees, but always in a way that has this kind of unique point of tension and expression. So it's difficult to describe in a way. I think that at least some way that you could do in like what I'm trying to do right now in a seminar or whatnot from the physical perspective. But I think the way you're describing it, that could help us get a kind of grasp of this in the field that they want us to look at it in terms of kinship and whatnot. Okay, so the very beginning of this section, when they're talking about, okay, this strange notion of, the intensive germinal field, or what do they call it, the germinal influx, a lot of different things. Yeah, and it's very strange, but one thing is that on one level, everyone in whatever this society will have the same kind of intensive being to a certain degree. And I think if you think of it as a field kind of phenomenon, you can kind of get the sense of it. What I mean by that would be, okay, say I'm living in some kind of tribal society, pre-capitalist, pre-state society. So I think we tend to think of, our family as this very limited thing that has a few people in it, and that's basically it. And then everybody outside of that that's just not family. I think what they're kind of getting at is, if you are in something like a tribal society, it's felt in a much different way. And it's in the sense that your affiliation, there's one level of your affiliation of where you feel like you are composed of the same thing as everyone else to certain degrees. And you can think of them in terms of a kind of subjective intensity that, okay, so your mother, that would be a high degree of intensity of feeling like you have some kind of affiliation of belonging and whatnot with your mother. And I think he's getting at this idea of affect and intensity. So those are usually connected, although not so much in a little bit in Anti-Oedipus, but that point is definitely emphasized more so in other books. And I think if you think of it as, okay, there's a kind of intensive affect where I feel like I'm connected in these different degrees with different people around me. And to some degree, everyone participates in the same kind of field of a kind of germinal germs, whatever you think of it as, DNA or whatever. Okay, so imagine there's, we got this field of DNA kind of going on, and that's what we all participate in, but each in a different way and in different degrees, where each one of us envelops the relations with the whole social field of this DNA, this biocosmic field, but at the same time, yeah, in different intensities. And I think what is going on here is that, okay, your affiliation more so, it's got these intensive distinctions and differences. And then this is kind of what's primary, is this primary level of affect and intensity. That's where things really come about on this kind of genetic level, where genesis happens in these things. But then you get this extensive movement, which then gives you distinct persons. And this is really connected with the whole, so one of the, I think the big points they're trying to make in these two sections is going to be that, so when you get these persons in this extensive level, that's what also gives you these prohibitions that go along with them. And they're trying to kind of look into that as a way to challenge certain notions about the prohibition of incest in society. So I think that's really important to understand kind of that transition from intensive to extensive, and how that has to do specifically with the prohibition of incest. So yeah, the intensive is going to be that pre-personal level. Extensive is going to be persons. It's going to be distinct persons. And this is going to be also what part of social repression, in the sense that this is where, by putting these intensive affiliations into extensive relationships between people, that's how you get these, alliance structures, which are based off of certain debts and whatnot. And also you get the extended affiliation structures. And that's kind of their big way of organizing society in this kind of grid, this extensive grid. But that's always going to be something that comes after the intensive. So this is really similar to, okay, so another kind of Deleuzian archetype is, he really likes the idea of transcendental illusion, which he gets from Kant to a large degree, but he sees, as almost all the philosophers he reads, he looks for transcendental illusions in a very interesting way. And in difference repetition, one of the big ones is that you have these intensive quantities, but just by their very nature, they will explicate or extend themselves into extensive quantities and give this illusion that that's just all they are. They're just extensive quantities that, you can measure with a ruler or whatnot. So that covers up this intensive aspect of it. But at the same time, the intensive aspect was really what generated the possibility for us to have these extensive measurements to begin with. And he's doing something like that also, just this time with affiliation and alliance and whatnot. Yeah, I think, okay, so another thing, so there's this whole thing about, you know, the germinal and the somatic, I think it would help. So I'm guessing a lot of people were pretty confused by that. Okay, so a lot of this is a reference to this, I guess he was kind of he's a biologist, Weizmann, and I don't understand his stuff that well, but I think the basic ideas that he had, you've got the germinal aspect of some kind of an organism, and you've got the somatic, or the soma, the body of an organism. And the thing is that the germinal, it's kind of like DNA, or genes more so. Okay, this is before DNA. But his idea is that this germinal aspect is immortal, and that's also what reproduces itself through these genealogical lines. So that there's a kind of immortality to life, but it takes on different bodies, that's the somatic. It's kind of like these individual bodies that you get for a particular organism. But yet there's this kind of germinal aspect where I guess one thing was that, okay, so your mother would be not really your mother from a genetic point of view, but from a somatic point of view, in the sense that, well, the common sense way of thinking of some kind of a parent, child relation. But then on this germinal level, there is actually a kind of shared genetic structure to some degree. And that's really what is taken as this intensive quality. I'm not sure exactly how it works. And I know that a lot of the Weizmann, his idea of this distinction between germinal and soma, that it's been disproved. So I'm not exactly sure what is going on there and why they're using this exactly, except that I think that he's just they're taking this concept and kind of extracting a philosophical concept in this case, and yeah. But yeah, I'll just leave it at that.
I was referring to 158 because it felt like that page was getting at a lot of what you were saying, Chase. And I found it like that was helpful or interesting to think about this like intensive affect feeling of like relating to somebody. I don't know, that was just kind of interesting. I think like maybe I'll talk more about this last week, and I feel like just the difference between like filial and alliance and like how they relate, and the way you were just talking about it, how like filial is kind of primary, but does it start out as like intensive, but then alliance comes in and it stirs it up, and then it like turns into extensive. And like I found myself, and maybe this is a trap, but maybe some points it's right, but like I found myself when I was initially encountering, and I wasn't here last week, but just so the whole time I've been reading filial and alliance, of like associating filial with like family and Oedipus, and like that's bad, and so it's like that, they're criticizing that. But then yeah, at the beginning of this little section 3, where they're just talking about filiation is first, alliance is second, alliance doesn't come out of filiation, and then this like relationship that filiation and alliance, like what are the effects, and with like intensive and extensive, I guess, how do those kind of two pairings bounce off of each other?
Yeah, I remember the first time I read this section, I was confused about exactly that, and exactly what is these distinctions and relations between the between filiation and alliance, and also the intensive and the extensive. Okay, so the second time reading it, I tried to pay a little more attention to it. And okay, so it seems like what they're saying is that you first have this intensive filiation, and that's that germinal placenta, cosmic egg, all that craziness. And then from there, you get an extensive system that's kind of like the transcendental illusion to a certain degree. But out of that extensive system, you get then an extended filiation and another extended alliance. But so the section before, when they're just talking about filiation and alliance on a kind of extensive level, they make the point that you can't deduce alliance structures from filiation. Because I think that's kind of they're challenging this primacy of the familial, and which I think is a kind of idea it's an Oedipal idea that, you're the first people, you got your mommy and your daddy as the familial, that this is what determines then social structures and all this stuff. It comes from, it's this projection from the familial. I think that's one of the reasons why they stress that so much, but those do apply, that applies to the extensive aspect. And I think the way they describe it, it makes sense in so the alliance structures, these lateral structures, it's just people getting together, these local lines, and deciding marriages based off of kind of who gave, this daughter to who, seeing that there's some kind of asymmetry of debt in these different lines of filiation, and kind of making deals about that. So that's that kind of alliance structure, and they're saying that alliance, that's what really determines the extended filiation, which is just kind of like your genealogy that you'd find on whatever, genealogy.com or something.
Like in my head, I'm thinking like the alliances like break like relations out of just these kind of intensive filiations.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, because that's
they're almost like jumps across intensive fields. And then the transcendent illusions that kind of like come out of those. I don't know, I have these like images in my head of like magnetic fields and iron filings now.
Yeah. So okay. So the alliance, that's kind of the first thing where social repression or production first kind of comes in and tries to break up the intensive. So it's kind of difficult to, I think this is where the relation, the intensive and the extensive is kind of difficult to understand, because, are they saying that if it wasn't for these alliance structures saying you can't marry your mother or your sister or your aunt or uncle or whatever, would we do that? Like, I don't think so. I don't think that's what they're arguing necessarily, although it kind of seemed like it. But those alliance structures, that is where the extensive kind of first really breaks into the intensive, and it breaks into it, I think, first by kind of demarcating, persons by their prohibition, by saying that these people cannot do that, can't marry these people. And that's directly kind of acting on the intensive, because it's breaking up those intensive structures that are the most intense, it seems like. And that's that seems like the big moment there. If there's going to be some kind of a generative moment where you first get from intensive to extensive, I think that would be it.
Something, and this kind of feels like a side note, but just to the point about Oedipus feeling universal, and I'm just trying to kind of throw out some thoughts, but they talk about like when they refer to like genealogy, and then the idea of like alliance does not derive from filiation. And I'm kind of running with something that Eugene Holland mentioned in his guide, where he kind of differentiated like history and genealogy, saying like history is about like these kind of like necessary things that like are developing, whereas genealogy is more so just like discontinuous contingencies. And it feels like they're making that argument about alliances don't necessarily just come out of filiations. And I feel like that's maybe a way of them speaking to the point that you mentioned earlier, Nevid, about like this argument of Oedipus not being universal, and that like, you know, just because we've arrived here doesn't necessarily mean that we were always meant to develop to this. And this is kind of like evolution, survival of the fittest.
So on page 160, they seem to be talking about some of the stuff that you guys have just been working through. So at the very top of 160, it is the great nocturnal memory of the intensive germinal filiation that is repressed for the sake of an extensive somatic memory created from the filiations that have become extended, patrilineal or matrilineal, and from the alliances they imply. And then the next paragraph, the system in extension is born of the intensive conditions that make it possible, but it reacts on them, cancels them, represses them, and allows them no more than a mythical expression. The signs cease to be ambiguous at the same time that they are determined in relation to the extended filiations and the lateral alliances. The disjunctions become exclusive or restrictive, either or instead of either or. The names, the appellations no longer designate intensive states, but discernible persons. Discernibility settles on the sister and the mother as prohibited spouses. The reason is that persons with names that now with the names that now designate them do not exist prior to the prohibitions that constitute them as such. So you know, so I don't know if this is saying anything more than you guys already said, but I mean, I'm assuming that this is just a natural process that kind of has to happen. You've got this intensive germinal filiation that is repressed for the sake of an extensive somatic memory. So in other words, if you're going to, if you're going to have traditions, cultural traditions, maybe is what he's saying with this extensive somatic memory, you've got to have relations that you can define well, whereas a continuous field will not allow that. And so in order to create this extensive somatic memory created from the filiations that have become extended, and so you get this repression of the intensive in order to generate these extensive relations of individuals that have now. So the impression I got is, before you get this process, the relationships are kind of fluid. I mean, mother, father, they don't have very sharply defined meanings and definitions, and the relations aren't terribly well defined. But once you start down this road, you start getting actual individuals that now can be attached to particular names, like this is the mother, this is the father, this is the brother. And then that's also when you start getting these prohibitions. And I haven't seen why, I don't remember why, or I don't see in this passage why the prohibitions arise. He says mother and sisters do not exist prior to their prohibitions as spouses, because he's not talking about Oedipus here, right? So these are prohibitions, I believe. Am I wrong, Chase? These are prohibitions that are not dependent on Oedipus. They're prohibitions that arise sort of spontaneously and naturally through this process of individuation, where roles become more well defined in the extensive relations.
Yeah, I think that's right. So they're specifically, I think one of the big points that they're making in this overall argument, against the primacy of the Oedipus complex is that the prohibitions going on here are not the same as the prohibition of incest you would see in the Oedipus complex, which a lot of this ethnology, it's going to be based off of, like Levi-Strauss. There is a kind of universal prohibition of incest, and a lot of they'll be making this connection, or a lot of ethnologists make this connection, I think, or psychoanalytically inclined ethnologists, something like that, between the prohibition of incest and the Oedipus complex. And I think that's what they're arguing against. And instead saying, yeah, okay, I think it's definitely true that, oh, echo. Okay, it's gone. All right. So the big thing about this is that, yeah, Neville, what you're saying, I think that's definitely right, that with this prohibition, it will come about more or less naturally, in the sense that in order to kind of get this society reproducing itself anyways, it will have to, it has to have some kind of alliance structure and a kind of extensive affiliation as well, kind of keeping this society in some kind of integrated structure of some type. And that's kind of how it comes about. And then on another, kind of from a different perspective, the same thing. So they talk a lot about this sort of intimation of the limit of this social organization, where all these flows that they're coding, and that's what the socius, the social body, is all about. It's all about coding these things into different affiliations, into different alliances and whatnot, that there's this intimation of, well, what if all the codes were gone and there's just this wild, just abandon of just flows without the codes? It's kind of like sensing that your society and everything that kind of gives it some kind of stable orientation and identity or whatnot, that there's a negative to that it could be gone. And I think that sort of tendency to fight against that, the decoding of these flows, and I think here a flow, and you can think of it as like the germinal flow, but it's really kind of like the flow of genes and people and whatnot. So you can think of it like that. I think that makes it at least a little more concrete, but that's kind of, so a society will naturally feel this, a strong desire to repress that kind of free flowing of affiliation. So, and also alliance, so that, not just anybody can marry anybody. We've got to keep this, really strict. Otherwise, this just total disaster could happen. It seems like they're saying that is a big part of why this is some kind of a natural kind of thing, to essentially have a structure of repression in society, as well as that kind of comes out of the intensive. So this is also, because it has the same structure of a transcendental illusion that you've got in difference repetition with the intensive and the extensive, it may help to think of it in terms that they give in difference repetition, where the extensive, so the transcendental illusion that's connected with this extensive quantity is entropy and thermodynamics, the second law of thermodynamics. So what Deleuze says there is that you have a natural kind of intensive depth to space and energy, and entropy. So entropy, you can kind of think of it as, in thermodynamics, they're studying how energy works in more or less closed systems. The thing is, you need these intensive differences with energy and these engines and whatnot to be able to, you need differences in temperature. But once you put that in a closed cycle, you will get these, you'll get the classic kind of thermodynamic tendency towards equalization and homogenized kind of quantities, blah, blah, blah. And then you can extrapolate from there to the heat depth of the universe and all that. So the details aren't super important, I think, at least for Anti-Oedipus, but I think that may help to think of at least something about why, what is going on with this intensive, extensive. And if you think of it as, okay, you've got a kind of engine running in a system, this is like a whatever car or something like that. You got an engine, it requires some kind of an intensive difference. Whether it's, burning the fuel in order to get it to run, but this will have also this movement where it extends itself out into extensive quantities of heat. And from there, you can get this predictable, homogenized kind of system. And I think there's something like that definitely also, because it also, the way it talks about, okay, the system in extension is born of the intensive conditions that make it possible, but it reacts on them, cancels them, represses them. So he also talks about it as a canceling, that these extensive quantities, it's because intensities and their movement will cancel themselves in an extension. And that's really why this all happens, and why this illusion is transcendental. It's built into the very structure of reality, that you have an illusion like this where it covers up the intensive. And I think there's something like that going on here too, except it's just with the social. There's a transcendental social illusion, but it's really kind of an act that just by having the social field of, these intensive flows of the germinal of genes and DNA and bodies and melting into each other and feeling each other up and all that good stuff, that from there you naturally, it will force itself into these extended conditions as well. I think that's what's going on.
So I missed somewhere in there. So I guess two questions. One, why does it force itself into these extended conditions? And I forgot what the other question was. I mean, here in that on top of page 60, he mentions that he says repress for the sake of an extensive somatic memory. Anyway, I'm wondering why it has to go that direction, or maybe maybe that's a nonsensical question. Maybe they just say this is what happens, and we're explaining the conditions that give rise to it.
Something I'm wondering about is, and maybe it relates to this, but the whole debt and surplus value of codes, and wondering what does this somatic extensive memory, this second memory, and that shift, like how does that plug into this idea of like surplus codes? And I'm wondering like if that's the answer of this, this, a desire. I feel like I don't know what word to use. Maybe desire is not right here, but just like how are things moving towards some sort of surplus code? Surplus.
Joey, if you know, I don't. One of my questions is what does surplus code mean? Do you have a sense of what that means? Because I don't have much of a sense of it.
Not exactly, and it's kind of a question, and part of me feels like maybe they haven't described it, but they've referenced it a few times now. And I remember too, like in the beginning sections in Eugene Holland's book on this chapter of the book, he like lays out those 6 principles that like this chapter revolves around, and 2 of them being debt and surplus value. And I'm wondering, like, I've seen them make that reference a few times to this surplus value of codes, but I feel like they haven't talked about it that much. And I'm wondering if they'll go more into that, or if we're already supposed to know what they're saying about it. I have in my notes the pages they mention on, but I do not know like what that means really. Pages 163 and 164 are where I've seen them kind of talk about this surplus value of codes. And then 163 is interesting. They talk a lot about codability, which I think maybe has something to do with turning ambiguous fields into discernible persons, because maybe, discernible persons can be coded. Bottom of 163, there's the surplus value of codes reference.
So I would say Marcuse makes a big, and I want to say there's some affinity between Marcuse's Eros and Civilization and Anti-Oedipus. And Marcuse makes a big hay of surplus value, and then kind of imports it to a psychoanalytic kind of view of repressive society. So surplus, I imagine surplus coding is, again, there's a certain amount of coding necessary for social functioning, and then surplus would be, what it ends up being in excess of that, like far, not necessarily far, but beyond what is needed for society to function. If you imagine all the ways that people are oppressed or repressed, it's to a certain degree, like we can't just in order for a society to function, we have to fulfill certain roles and obey certain, at least minimal regulations, right? But then the actual societies we live in impose more rules and more regulations than is strictly necessary for society to function, and those are surplus, right? And it goes back to the old Marxist concept, right? Like, the worker adds value to a product or to a commodity, and then the capitalist, basically takes that product or commodity and sells it at a price and pays the worker a wage. But the wage is less than the value added by the labor, right? And so the difference between the wage and the actual value added by the labor is surplus value. So Marcuse makes a big use of that in Eros and Civilization, talking about the extraction of surplus value and then surplus repression, basically taking it on the chin, right? In order for a society to function, we all need to be told what to do to a certain extent, right? But then if you look around at the society we actually live in, we're all told what to do or how to think in excess of what's needed, right, in order for society to function. So, translate that to coding. You might say that a certain amount of coding is necessary for society to function, but surplus coding would be the excess of that.
Yeah, I think that's pretty helpful, especially, so there's the reference to the Marx's concept of surplus value is, I think, really important. And then, yeah, surplus value of code. So on 163, it talks about, how does this coding happen, but what does it mean to be non-coded? So one of the reasons that this germinal flow is repressed or coded is because it's in that intensive state, it's not codable, but you can kind of turn it into something codable by taking these flows or whatnot and turning them into distinct people with distinct structural relations, father, mother, son, mommy, daddy, me, whatever. You get something like that. That's what allows you to code a society. And that is also, so I think that is necessary in order to have any kind of a society that wouldn't just kind of, I don't know, fall apart or something. I don't know. But so a society kind of needs to have these codes in order to have some kind of continuity, it seems like, at least on some level. Well, I think, so another thing is that society, at least Deleuze and Guattari, it seems like they are saying that a society operates, it's mainly just this process of coding these various flows. And without that, there is no real society. So
well,
if you
maybe
think of it,
I'm not, I mean, they may not be dealing with this, but I'm kind of, since they're talking about these primitive societies and how this stuff gets up and running, it almost sounds like they're talking about kind of an evolutionary point, evolutionary point of view. In other words, how does society evolve? And so my question is, if, what I get, like I said in the chat, maybe the question is, what's the impetus for generating coded flows in society at all? Because I'm wondering if you've got this sort of germinal flux thing, what is the pressure or the conditions that generate these repressions and subsequent codings? Like, why did that ever, you could say, oh, well, you've got to have it in order to have society. That I kind of understand, but why do you have to have society?
Yeah, I don't know. Why do we have to have society? I don't think we need society. Fuck society, Yeah.
Well, what I'm saying is from a developmental point of view, like, why did this start? Why did it get started? Like now, okay, we want to have society, but the question I'm asking is, if you've got this sort of pre-coded condition, maybe there was no pre-coded condition. That's, like, are they talking about like a temporal evolutionary development where you had some pre-coded structure, or is he just saying you have these different moments, and kind of that these atemporal moments that explain how society emerges out of this stuff? So it sounds like you're saying they're not giving kind of an evolutionary account.
No, so they definitely don't want to give an evolutionary kind of historical account, saying that, you first have, well, especially not a kind of pre-social, almost state of nature kind of thing. They're definitely not saying that. I think they would say that just doesn't make any sense at all. And also, so they really make this point, they really hit this point in 1,000 Plateaus, where they talk about the state apparatus and how that came about, but they'll actually talk about that more in some of the sections coming up, where they'll talk about the state and how the state comes about. So you'll see that this other social formation, it's occurring simultaneously with also this primitive territorial social organization kind of thing too. The idea is that they really don't like this idea of a kind of evolutionary progression of history, and the kind of, there's these really crude readings of Hegel that are kind of like this, that we're evolving to perfection in society through the state apparatus and all this. We've got this kind of this primitive in the sense of primitive, where it's not very well developed, and also that it's the first thing in a historical progression, evolution, but you're evolving in a way where it's almost like an equivocation of the word evolve, where it's saying like, oh, evolution is necessarily has this kind of this value term, where it's by evolving, it's getting better, through technology and all this fun stuff you've got. So that's definitely, they're definitely trying to challenge that, which I think that will be probably more clear, maybe not in the next section, but yeah, the next two or so. But then, yeah, so why do they really have these or whatnot? Why is this really going on? Yeah, I think maybe that, so I think in one sense, it's not necessarily that you've got these individuals kind of doing this, but if you look at any kind of, anywhere that you find people just kind of living and being able to exist and survive and whatnot, you don't find people that are just kind of scattered, and don't have any kind of traditional way of life or something. You don't find, somebody just kind of like in a jungle, just by themselves, just hanging out. We need to reproduce with other people. We need, there's no Robinson Crusoe's kind of, I think there's that aspect in that we do live in a society, and that's kind of one of the conditions of possibility for the reproduction of society, is that we have to live in a society that also has this extensive aspect where you're probably going to have some kind of a mythology that tells about, where this all came about, which they interpret as those are explaining the intensive conditions, and it's kind of fall into the extensive. But once again, don't think of that so much as it was an actual kind of historical happening. But okay, so you've got this aspect, but also an idea that, well, the Prohibition Incest, I think that's a good example of something where, yeah, we need to have some kind of structure to who can do what can we do, who can marry who. And it seems like every society at least does have that, something along those lines. And I think part of the motivation for why they have that kind of goes into that whole, what they're talking about in terms of the universal, where the universal is sensed at the end as the kind of apocalyptic end, where all these flows would be decoded and there would be no order to society at all. But that we unconsciously sense this just by living in society. I think you can kind of get this with every society has this kind of just irrational fear, it seems like, that kind of just grips it a lot of times. And you can kind of see the negative of society by these boogeymen that it kind of presents to society as, this is the negative of society. This is what has no way of having any meaning for us. So this kind of reminds me of So Baudrillard, he talks about this with terrorism and death. He says that death has no real meaning in our society. It's only just a negative. We can't think of any way that something like terrorism could mean anything. Even though, so and I think even when you think about it, you know, some terrorist event happens, you know, it's meaningless, it's senseless violence, you know, something like that. So he sees that as, that's this idea that, well, actually, in some cases, it does a lot. It, you know, I'm not supporting terrorism or anything. Don't get me wrong, but that it does actually have a kind of social meaning for other cultures. It's our culture that doesn't find meaning in it because what, it can't get surplus value out of just death in itself, I guess. You know, you can get surplus value out of maybe the prevention of death, but we can't get surplus value out of death itself, where maybe other societies can. So I think maybe something like that. But yeah, I think the surplus value of code thing, kind of, you can see that as, okay, you've got these, so the gift societies, I think, is a big part of this, and what's going on with this whole, the primitive territorial kind of thing, is that, so these alliances, they operate off of debt, and so this is also what they kind of get from Nietzsche and the genealogy of morality, is that you'll have okay, a prohibition of certain types of incest at the same time that they come up with these notions of the family, of distinct relationships within the family. And but also you can kind of give your daughter as a gift in these societies, and that gives you, that's a way of kind of coding a positive valuation for the person you give it to, but then that gives a reciprocal, they then have a responsibility to reciprocate that, is now they've got a kind of marker on them that shows an imbalance, and those kind of imbalances, that's kind of what's coding society on these on this alliance perspective, but also that alliance is also what determines a lot of the extended filiation as well. So the surplus value in this sense, I think, would be something like that you can get some kind of a positive valuation in some way from kind of, say, marrying your daughter off, making some kind of doing some wheeling and dealing with the local marriages and alliances, and you know, which tribe can connect with this tribe and blah blah blah. The fact that you can use those codes of, you know, who goes with who, and use that to some kind of advantage just through the kind of manipulation of the codes, I think that's kind of what they're getting at with a surplus value of code. And if you look at so 163, when they talk about, you know, just what it takes to code something, so the germinal flow, you know, the body without organs and all this, so it says that it would either cause everything to flow or it would block everything. It's kind of got this black or white universal quality in the sense, at least that's the way it works, where the coding involves selecting different elements from a flow and saying what can go and what needs to be blocked. So it seems like that's one of the big things that's going on about, that's what a code does. This is, you know, the kind of disjunctive recording where it determines, you know, either or. It's selecting different things from these elements. So it's saying, yeah, this flow of, you know, semen womb material can go here, but it can't go there. It's blocking some elements and letting other elements pass. But that gives certain advantages, even if they're just temporary, and also have a kind of reciprocal obligation in this gift economy. That's that surplus value of code that you can kind of, well, just like you get, I think these people that are doing the alliances, it's similar to the Marx study of the surplus value of labor, and that they're not the ones actually being married in some of these cases where they're arranging the marriages, but you've got these whatever tribal elders or something like that, and they're the ones that are kind of profiting, in a sense, from the surplus value of those coatings, of selections of, the flow of wheat, whatever, goes here in this stockpile, and this other part is blocked here. It doesn't go here. It doesn't go to this part. I think it's something kind of like that. Yeah, at least that's the way I understand it.
Is that fluctuation, and forgive me for being so late, children and stuff, but is that fluctuation between the two extreme poles what he means on 160 when he says the system is an extension born? It's like 160, second paragraph. The system is an extension born of the intensive conditions that make it possible, but it reacts on them, cancels them, represses them, and allows them no more than a mythical expression. The signs cease to be ambiguous at the same time as they are determined in relation to the extension filiation and the lateral alliances. The disjunction becomes exclusive, restrictive. The either or else replaces the intensive either or. The names, the applications no longer designate intensive states, but discernible persons. Because that fluctuation and kind of like the complete abandonment of reference theory in regards to how that group operates between the two social poles almost had reference, like to me, it echoed Derrida as well. Is that an appropriate assumption that there was some type of criticism of reference theory and the echoing between the two social poles for the coding having Derrida-like influence?
Yeah, the reference to Derrida, it was something about prohibition of incest, right? Saying that, I think they actually referenced Derrida.
Oh, they did?
That
was him?
So they referenced Derrida about how incest is impossible, something like that. Which, it seems like a pretty kind of a ridiculous claim on the face of it.
Did I read over that completely? I didn't even know they mentioned his name. Because I remember them saying incest is impossible, and it was like towards 165 when he was talking about homosexuality as well, or 161.
So yeah, what I think of, okay, so for Derrida, in terms of, so Derrida, he likes to, deconstruct these binaries, exclusive binaries. And I think there's some similarities with Derrida and Deleuze and Guattari, in the sense that they also like to challenge this kind of exclusive use of the disjunction. And so what they call bi-univocal relations, which I had no idea what that meant for like 3 years or something. But what it means is that you just have a kind of one-to-one correspondence. You have two series and you have kind of a one-to-one binary correspondence between them. And I think it's something similar is also going on with the way that they describe, in this case, certain kind of social systems, that you'll have something like that that operates on that kind of binary distinction level. But then they'll have something like, okay, but there's an intensive movement that challenges that. So I think there's some similarity with Derrida there, although I will say that there's also there's a big difference or différence between Derrida and Deleuze. And Deleuze, so they'll kind of reference each other occasionally. But Derrida was kind of, he had a lot of anxiety about, what kind of like words you can use and all this. And to a certain extent, Deleuze doesn't care about that. He's just kind of like, yeah, I don't care about that, or, textuality, or doing like a textual analysis of things. So there's parts where they kind of talk shit about each other, but there's also kind of a mutual respect. And, for a long time, I didn't even know I only knew Deleuze as the person whose name is next to Derrida in the library. And but it turns out they're really quite different. Yeah. Hopefully that's somewhat answered the question. But yeah, that's kind of that's weird, because Nevitt read that passage before, so that was interesting. It was kind of a difference in repetition moment there.
Oh, wow. I'm sorry, Nivet. Again, I'm very sorry for being late. I will not be late next week. So like Derrida is more about the intensity, and this is like, not, since this isn't really a discussion about Derrida, there are some elements of influence here, but this is more so like the productive aspect of the desire machines fluctuating between the two poles of intensity of that faction at a given time. That could be like what coding is, like an agreement, an alliance between the two social poles of this constant series of production.
Yeah, so the two poles, I think in this case, if I remember, it's saying that, so do they specifically say that the two poles, those are between the two different types of extension, the alliance and filiation?
Let me look.
Is so what I kind of remember is that they're saying on one level you can kind of give a logical order and a logical distinction between the intensive filiation, extensive filiation, and extensive alliance. But that on another level, you kind of have to presuppose that all three of these are operating simultaneously as sort of reciprocal conditions of possibility for each one, and that you can only have one if you have the other ones. So that you have to kind of consider that you have the extensive filiations of people just marrying each other, that you also have to have the alliance structures too, where you have people, setting up marriages between these people and that, and also breaking up this kind of germinal influx, which would just take all the codes to shit if it wasn't put into some kind of an alliance structure, I think. Yeah. Okay, so Joseph, since I see the word shaman here, what do you put? So one thing I thought that was very interesting about this reading was in the fourth section on 167, this description of this ritual of divination and whatnot, this where you've got this sick person, and I thought that was very interesting. So on 167, they talk about schizoanalysis in action, the discovery of desires, unconscious investments of the social field, that you can consider many primitive cures in this regard as schizoanalysis in action. And they talk about shamanistic cure. So they talk about, they say that they're challenging this, that there's a simple parallel structure between psychoanalytic cure and shamanistic cure, but then they're saying, I think though, that these shamanistic cures, that's more like a schizoanalysis in action kind of thing going on. And they talk about how, you know, this ritual of divination and healing and whatnot, that it's not just simply about this one person and, you know, their family, that, you know, the kind of psychoanalytic kind of thing where they would say, oh, you know, your dad, your mom, blah, 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 even though it seems to be talking about the ghost of his maternal grandfather. That's what's going on. So saying, yeah, it appears Oedipal on first glance, but what is going on is a kind of schizoanalysis in the sense that they're breaking open those relations and showing that there's all these investments in the social field that underlie those. And especially it extends all the way to these colonizer-colonized relations. And then indeed that Oedipus is reliant on colonization, seems like. So I thought that was a pretty interesting move in the sense, first, that you've got so shamanistic divination and healings and whatnot, that this is schizoanalysis in action, which, you know, I mean, a book like this, it's so difficult and at times abstract. I think it helps to have whatever kind of concrete example you possibly can. So there's that aspect, but then also that it kind of extends to this analysis of colonialization. I thought that was just really interesting. Yeah.
At times abstract. Just a little
It
bit.
seemed to me that they were, you know, and I don't know, I mean, it's like at one point you said this book is polemical, or at least it's polemical in places. And, you know, in this last section, they seem to basically be saying it is the Oedipalization of Western society that is responsible for the abuse of colonization of other nations that were not so structured. So, you know, like that quotation I wrote up there, Oedipus is something like euthanasia with an ethnocide. So they're being pretty blunt there.
I think this would be interesting to compare to other theorists that have, you know, talked about colonialism, Fanon and whatnot. I think that would be interesting to see if there's some kind of a comparison to be made there or whatnot. So one of the ways that they describe that, I think, is that so in a colonized social structure, you'll get a limitation of solutions to different problems. You'll have it be limited. Things that are really social problems will be limited to solutions that are only a kind of restrictive individual, restricted atomistic individual solution, or that have to do with only with your immediate family. I think that helps kind of make things a little more clear, in the sense that this is one of the big kind of movements going on, is that act of taking things from the social field and restricting them to the individual, the atomistic individual, you know, the model of the privation of the anus that we talked about for so long last week, which is great. It's that really is part of how social repression works and how it kind of leads to psychic repression. That just, I don't know, it just made sense to me that, don't challenge the social aspect. Instead, it's an individual problem. It's a problem with your family. Get this right with your mommy and daddy, before you go challenging social powers. Clean your room before you start cleaning up the world and all this. Yeah.
What is Joseph going on about in the chat? Because that sounds interesting to me, but I'm kind of confused on the sexual stuff.
Yeah, I'm sorry. But I was thinking of how like he's linking the sexual expression. So they're like so further on in, well, actually, Joey and I were just talking about this on page 165, where he said male homosexuality is therefore a representation of alliance that represents the ambiguous signs of intense bisexual affiliation. So I'm wondering if he's linking the social aspect with the sexual aspect and the economic aspect, like it's all part of one whole system, and that all of these tribes need not to be reduced to either like a psychoanalytic tradition or some reason, but the ability to express and have their own rules of alliance, which I found really fascinating, to link sexual expression and desire to the social dynamics, for example, of the colonization aspect that Joey just mentioned. So it's like all three are being implied as being part of being able to have its own limitless sense of production. And sexuality isn't just being reduced to something like a civilization is repressed, like Freud is saying.
I'm trying to put that together. So this idea of like my fetish for something is not because my true desire is repressed, but because there's this kind of like social alliance aspect to sexual desire.
Or maybe finding somebody that has a fetish like you that is allowing you to express it without it being reduced to a psychoanalytical reason, which produces more social aspects in different tribes with their own rules and alliances, and doesn't have shame associated with it.
Yeah, I think I get almost like the selection of a fetish connects me to different people or
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know if any of you have watched the TV version of The Handmaid's Tale. It is terrifying and depressing. But in that story, the society that is being built around these fundamentalist Christian principles, at least nominally, you see, the women are pushed to the margins. So the women are wives, baby carriers, like literally, the handmaids, or house carers, and everything, all the power is in the hands of the men. And so that's, when I read that passage that Joseph is referring to, I was, thinking about the way that it plays out. Is it's this kind of big bromance thing. You've got all these guys, and they're always meeting together, and they're doing all this stuff together, and there's all these male relations that is sort of the core of the power structure for the society, and then they define women as kind of in opposition to all that. So anyway, that's kind of what came to mind when I was reading that stuff. It's the male relationships, and the men probably have richer relationships with one another than they do even with their own wives, because the wives are relegated to these marginal tasks. They don't even have to have sex with their wives because they got the handmaids for that. And so, all their primary social and emotional relationships are primarily probably among these, this class of men. At least as far as the TV shows goes, there's no explicit homosexuality in terms of like intercourse or anything like that, but there's this whole network of male relationships that's kind of the foundation of the society.
I almost like get this sense that it's like they're saying like those relationships are sexual, but it's not like sexual, but it's like that investment is that like erotic.
Yeah.
And then they make this point on 173. I'm not looking at the quote, I'm just looking at my note, and I know it's from page 173, but I think they make some comment about like the desire for the parent, edible desire, as like a response really to the fact that all these other social investments are repressed. They're saying like the real prohibition, like what's really being repressed is this kind of like social investment that and that just leaves us with feeling like, oh, I must just desire my mom, my dad.
Like that.
For the thing I can't have.
Damn it. I hate being late. Oh well. Here she is.
Well, Hunter never got to give us his thing that he was going to do, but oh well.
What was he going to do?
He was gonna, way back when, I asked that question about the universalization, and then what he just put a comment was, I would like to respond to that, and then I have something else I want to talk about. But, so I don't know what the something else was, but anyway.
Atwood came to St. Mary's College in San Antonio, and I got to meet her and hear her speak. She's really, really cool. Like she spends a good deal of time rallying against the utilitarian aspect of higher education policy. And she's so eloquent, but she's such a down-to-earth, wonderful person and amazing writer. So I kind of fanboyed a little bit when I met her. I got all nervous.
I've heard a couple of interviews with her. One of them, I think Ezra Klein did an extended interview, like over an hour, and I had the same impression. She's just a really interesting, intelligent, thoughtful person. I'm a bit of a fanboy myself.
Who was it? Margaret Atwood. She wrote The Handmaid's Tale.
Oh, okay, I got you.
So any final parting comments? Okay, well, go ahead. What was that, Dylan?
I got some catching up to do.
Well, to be quite honest, the amount of reading that I would have to do to really be up to speed, to me, it looks like a bottomless pit. There's just so much. Or maybe no, that's the bad analogy. It looks like a tower reaching into the heavens. I mean, there's so much stuff here that I just don't have, a grasp of. But
no doubt.
I feel like I read the same thing over and over and then have new questions I want to ask the group. So yeah, you're not alone.
Yeah, and then there's that whole rhizomatic thing. So it's not even a pile. It's like this huge network of roots. And so, you can run out this way and then run over this way and then run back that way. And you're never going to get the whole damn thing. So.
Yeah, so I will say that the rhizome thing, they say in 1,000 Plateaus, you can read any of the plateaus in any order. I don't think that's totally true. It helps to actually read the whole thing in order, I've found. Now that I've almost read the whole thing now, and they really do rely on these other parts in the beginning. And yeah, I don't know. That's my opinion.
I haven't read 1,000 Plateaus, but I've oftentimes seen people kind of like throw things out like, oh, you can go in any order, but then when you actually look at it and see how they put it in an order, and how things that are later kind of a little bit presuppose what's earlier, then you know what I mean? Like with all the best intentions in the world, I think sometimes people who want to disabuse themselves of the notion of order don't do it successfully, because oftentimes there's at least a minimal level of order that we need in order to just understand.
And difference in repetition definitely has a structure to it, that people point to a lot. So, okay.
Usually there's a pretty clear structure in all of Deleuze's books. He's he's pretty good at having a sensible structure in a book. He's just good at it. He's also really good at writing conclusions. So there's the conclusions, even of these little sections, I think you can kind of pick up on it, that there's usually some bangers at the conclusion, which is the total opposite of how I write, because when I'm ending something, I'm so tired and my brain is fried that I'm just like write absolute shit at the end. And I'm just like, oh, that was awful, but thank God it's done, you know? Yeah. So I have respect for the good conclusions and structures and whatnot, because I can't do that either.
Eric will appreciate this. I had to write a short story when I was in high school. And when I turned in, and my English teacher said, it looks like at the end, you just kind of just wrapped things up and finished it. You know, it just like kind of, and I'm like, no. But that's exactly what I did. It's like, oh God, I've got to finish this story. It's due tomorrow. Oh well. See you guys later. Bye-bye.
It was good to be back, guys.
Yeah, glad to have you
Bye.
back.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.